Hello, friends. Welcome to another GCX online panel. This is so exciting. I'm so excited to be back here again talking about more very important topics during this time we have together. My name is Snaps. I am a mental health advocate, mindfulness coach, general weirdo on the internet. You can find me on Twitch at SheSnaps, twitch.tv/SheSnaps. That's also my Patreon link. But everything else, if you're looking for me after this to have more conversations, everything else is MindOfSnaps. Because of what I do, because I'm so involved in having conversations with the community, it became very clear to me in my time online that communication is something that is so severely lacking. And given the nature of the world right now and everything that's going on, it is more important than ever that we start learning how to communicate more effectively with others and communicating with kindness. There is so much going on. We don't need to be adding more to it by communicating in such an aggressive or antagonistic manner. So I've assembled this amazing team of folks here, and we're going to give them all an opportunity to introduce themselves in a moment. But we are here to help give you a little bit of information on how you can start to work on becoming a better communicator. So I'm going to go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves right now. And we'll start off with you, Hunter. Tell everyone who you are, where to find you, and what you're all about.
Sounds good. My name is Hunter Thrasher, and I'm extremely honored to be a part of this conversation today and this discussion. I'm currently working on a doctorate in ethical leadership, and much of my work in that doctorate program has been focused on interpersonal communication, communicating with others well. I also have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in theology. I'm a pastor on a staff at a church in rural Arkansas. And much of my job kind of surrounds teaching people how to treat and communicate with others well. Like we're talking about today, communicate with kindness, with love, to treat others not only with equality, but with equity. So you can find me on Twitter at HAThrash22. I'm also still on Facebook, and sadly, and while I'm not a content creator, but you can sometimes find me in chat on Twitch with the name Rev Thrash. So
there you go. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be able to have some of your insights from, I imagine how challenging it must be to lead a congregation and do things like that, communicating with kindness. It sounds like you've got some really great knowledge to back that up. All right, thanks. Sarko, we'll jump over to you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, Sarko, privileged to be here, honored to be able to speak on this topic. Military veteran, been in the Navy for 22 years, currently filling a senior enlisted leader role. A bit about my background. I'm a communicator by trade. My rating facilitates the need for a lot of communication. As a gunner's mate, I have to run weapons qualifications, get people qualled up, identify discrepancies in their form, their practice, and then get them qualified so that they can do their job. I'm a hand raiser, so I've had a unique career. I've been able to be a part of every community the Navy has, except for I've never been stationed on a submarine or attached to an aviation squadron. So I've been able to have the privilege to learn to communicate in the various communities that we have. I've also been a boot camp instructor, and I'm currently stationed at the Naval Academy, which is a similar job, only instead of less knife handing and more by, with, and through. So again, kind of adding depth to the bench on that, communicating both with kindness and at times varying degrees of kindness.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to be a little bit more like, all right, we got to go, but you can still do it nicely, right?
Absolutely.
I like that you described yourself as a hand raiser. I was like, oh, I get it. I like that. Okay. Ray, we'll head over to you. Go ahead and introduce everyone, or introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, I'm Ray, and also known as Wiferton or Allison. So you can find me, I guess, at RaeDebug, RaeDeebug. But I am new to streaming this last month and just kind of getting connected to things and seeing how this all works, and it's been pretty fun so far. But in my other life, I am a social worker. I've done lots of different roles. I worked in a treatment program for kids with really intense behaviors for several years, and then I went and worked as an early childhood consultant for mental health, and then I went and worked within early childhood special education for a couple of years, and now I am a therapist who I like to do things. I like to say I'm a non-traditional therapist, and I do things pretty different with my families. And yeah, I love working with kids and parents and people, and I'm very excited to be here.
I'm very excited that you reached out. I'm excited to have you as a part of this.
Thank you.
All right, Bossy, we'll head over to you, and that works out well too, because you and Ray have a little bit of overlap there.
Yeah, we do. So I'm Bossy. They, them pronouns. My handles on Twitter is at being bossy with an underscore at the end. You can find me on Twitch. There's no underscore at the end. I don't stream too much. It's more like a casual thing. I do enjoy it though. You can find me on Bars with Snaps actually on Fridays. It stands for Becoming an Anti-Racist Society. I'm a school counselor. I also enjoy very much working with children. A lot of people don't know what school counselors do. Like, you know what a school psychologist is, but you don't know what a school counselor is. I'm not a therapist, but we have a lot of therapeutic type things that we learn, and we bring those to the table. And basically, we assist families with communication a lot within the school and without the school or outside of the school. And we help them with basic needs like food, shelter, stuff like that, when especially when there's no social worker in the school.
Thank you, Bossy. I'm glad you could be a part of this today. All right, Dr. Goku, your turn.
Hey everyone, so my full name is Dr. Jean-Luc Williams. I'm a resident in psychology. You can find me on everywhere on the internet, mainly at SSJ5Goku28, but I'm better known as Dr. Goku.
Perfect. All right, well, we're just going to jump right in because this will give you an opportunity to kind of speak more to some of the knowledge that you have. As we were all having discussions, amongst this group, as far as takeaways that we wanted to offer and things we wanted to discuss today, we talked about what is necessary to facilitate effective and compassionate communication. And one of the first aspects of that is you got to know what you want to say, right? You have to determine your own individual needs and figure out what it is that you're looking to do and accomplish in these conversations before you start. So how would you recommend for, the average person out here hanging out, watching or listening later, how do you establish or determine your own individual needs so that you can then begin communicating those to others?
So recognizing your needs and communication in general is such a loaded topic because it's so multi-layered. One thing we can look at is the hierarchy of needs. I don't know how many people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is it really set in stone? Not really. But there are 5 main levels. So you have your physiological needs, your safety needs, your belongingness, love needs, your esteem needs, and then your self-actualization. We rarely and very not often get to that top level, but mainly it's those physical and safety needs. And then we go to those belonging needs. And generally in communication, it's those belonging and loving needs that we try to communicate, to share with people that we often don't necessarily come across. And that comes often within assertiveness. So assertiveness is a key cornerstone of communication. And it's on a spectrum. So on one end here, we have people that can be more passive. And on the other end, we have people that are more aggressive. And assertiveness is kind of somewhere in the middle. And then there's that underlying one that's called passive aggressiveness. And assertiveness, in a nutshell, is the recognition of your own needs and your own wants not being more or less important than other people's. Oftentimes, people that have a harder time communicating tend to be on more the passive side. And I see this oftentimes in my office, that people that tend to be on the more passive side, they have a harder time expressing what they want. They have a harder time when it comes to asserting their needs because they're afraid of certain backlashes. And when we don't verbalize our needs, that frustration tends to pile up until someone gets to an explosion point where they will communicate, just not very effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why we're here now today, right? It's because we're recognizing this, especially given that we're doing so much physical distancing. A lot of us are finding ourselves stuck in situations, where we're dealing with our family or our friends or people who we are close to in proximity, but don't quite know how to communicate with. So I like that idea of the little, like, here's the spectrum. And as soon as you said passive aggressive, I was like, hello, yes, glad that came up nice and early, because I think that is one of those things that will just tank a conversation so fast. So can you give us just like a quick example of passive aggression and how that could be detrimental, how it might be able to be reframed?
Okay, well, I'll go through all three. So being aggressive is someone that tends to steamroll over other people's wants and needs to get what they want. Not generally people that are angry, but they tend to use certain phrases to get what they want. The perfect example I use with all of my clients is, think of a used car salesman.
Oh no, I used to sell cars. That was the first thing that came to mind too.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like reaching for the handle as they're getting out of the car. You want to buy a car from me, lady?
Yeah, because they're going to give you all these extra bonuses, and they're not doing it for your own benefit. They're doing it because they're getting more commission. On the other end of the spectrum, someone that's more passive is someone that'll put other people's needs in front of their own when they're trying to avoid potentially negative consequences, like I mentioned. So think about someone that's getting bullied on the schoolyard. So they're going to give that lunch money because they don't want to get a fist in their mouth. That's kind of the ends of the spectrum. And then assertiveness is knowing that we can verbalize what we want, and we can set kind of a gap in terms of, this is what I want, and this is what I am willing to concede to, and meet me somewhere in here. Passive aggressive is that passive person that builds and builds and builds, hoping the other person will catch on to what they want without necessarily expressing what they want. People aren't as perceptive as we would want them to be, meaning we need to express what we want. And I have an example of a client of mine that is kind of that to a T, where she was expressing to her husband that she wanted to go out for walks. And over a period of time, he was always saying no. Where she reached a boiling point, he said no, and she went to the kitchen, she started doing the dishes, and every dish that she dried, rather than just dropping it nicely in the cupboard, she was kind of slamming it each and every time, making a ruckus. He came to the kitchen and said, "Oh, what's wrong?" And she said, "Oh, you know what's wrong." And his response was, "No, I don't." And that's the explosion.
Yeah, that's a great example. So I think this is a good time then to switch gears and head over to Hunter. Having Goku just kind of line that all up for us, what do you advocate for the people who you talk to when they're dealing with situations like that exact one? There's this building of pressure, and then finally the dishes start getting slammed. You should know what's wrong kind of stuff comes up. What do you tend to advocate there?
Right. So for me, one thing that's extremely important is being able to recognize when those needs aren't being met in myself. And so to do that, like, this is just for me. I'm not necessarily talking about recognizing those in the other person just now. But for me, that takes meditation and reflection to be able to number one, to identify that I am feeling anger, or I'm feeling even happiness, or whatever emotion might come with that. That takes practice. And to do that, it takes taking yourself out of the situation after it, maybe even after it's happened, and be able to identify that. In this conversation, I felt angry. And then once you identify that, you can then identify why you felt that way. I felt angry because this happened. And it could be I felt angry or I felt frustrated because I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel, maybe I was hungry or I didn't get enough sleep the night before. It wasn't exactly what the other person said, but it was kind of a compounding of things that made me react in the way that I did. So, and the reason why I talk about meditation and reflection is because that truly is practice for being able to train yourself to be able to do that in the moment. I don't know that it comes naturally for very many people to be able to recognize right then, I'm feeling angry right now, and this is why. But after training yourself through kind of that reflection, whether at the end of the day or the next morning, and reflecting on that, you can slowly start to see yourself identifying those emotions and those needs in real time. And that allows you to create a measured response to that situation, but also it allows you to identify those emotions and those needs in other people. And so when there's a lack of communication there, when it kind of has been building up to this boiling point, you can be able to identify that in yourself, and then you can have this measured reaction to maybe the spouse that says, "What's wrong?" Because you can start to understand their own emotions or their own reactions and needs as well.
Yeah, I especially like out of that just the reference to, first of all, meditation, because I will be talking about meditation forever. But I love what you kind of clarified there, because we have a lot of conversations about, like, to understand others, you really have to understand yourself first.
Yes.
And I think what you just explained, like, really, really gets to the core of that. If you don't understand how to identify emotional responses in yourself, it's going to be very challenging for you to look at even the people you think you know very well,
Right,
and actually see the truth coming out. And you're going to end up in situations where someone's slamming dishes around and you're like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
absolutely.
That's great. I'm glad that self-reflection is a big part of that for you. So moving into our next aspect of communication here. We kind of touched on it in this a little bit with the idea of nonverbal communication. In this particular example, it was a less than ideal form of it when we're talking about slamming dishes. But what other types of communication exist? And what types of, like, nonverbal cues should we try to be aware of in ourselves, like watch for in others? What are things we should avoid reading into too much also? And we'll go to you for this one, Goku.
So, like I mentioned earlier, communication is so complex and multi-layered, but we can kind of divide it into three things. So, one being assertiveness, two being verbal communication, and three being nonverbal communication. Because it's impossible for people to not communicate. Even when we're not communicating something, we are communicating something. So, again, assertiveness is recognizing our wants and our needs, being able to express them, where we go into that verbal aspect. So verbal communication is the words that we choose, but also we need to recognize that not everyone has the same meaning for every word that we may have. So understanding certain cultural aspects or significance of specific words is important. Because when someone says one thing in one particular dialect, it may mean something completely different to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important with nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is even more important, I would say, than verbal communication. Because people will pick up on the nonverbal cues even before the verbal cues. Humans are mammals, we're animals, we've evolved in that way. Way before we've learned to verbally communicate, we've learned to read body language. So we have that innate tendency to recognize certain things. And when someone says, "Oh, I'm fine," and then you can just see the postures. Like, nope, no, you're not fine. Tell me what's going on. So some of those things we need to look at. The words that we use, like I said, are so important, but also the way that we say it, the tempo, the intonation, the way that we stand, that we present ourselves, the way that we may look at someone. I mentioned something on Twitter the other day where looking someone in the eye in North America is great. I'm showing attention to what you're saying. If you look to Asian cultures, certainly within Japan, that's kind of insulting for people in Japan. So you kind of have to shift your gaze generally. So knowing those cultural aspects, even when you're not necessarily aware, it can change the entire meaning of what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And cultural aspects aside, because you and I were both commenting on the same, I put out a Twitter thread, and I'll drop the link in here unless a mod wants to track it down and drop it. But I put out a Twitter question asking folks like some thoughts about what they find to be really frustrating about communication. And there was someone who had responded and said they get so upset when people don't look them in the eye when they're communicating because they feel disrespected, or they feel like that person isn't being truthful, that they're like lying or something. And my first thought was like, ooh, when I was really dealing with a lot of anxiety and I was like dealing with a lot of self-worth issues, I had a difficult time looking people in the eyes as well. And I know a lot of my friends who are autistic also mentioned that that is something that doesn't quite feel right to them. So I was trying to encourage that person, like, it might not be what you think it is. Like, there are a lot of different reasons why someone might not be making eye contact. So while like nonverbal communication is obviously a big deal, how do we make sure that we're not trying to read too much into it as well?
Well, it takes practice. So people often say, well, communication, it's something that we all know, we all learn, we should just know it. No. Communication is hard. And we may have like an understanding of how one person communicates, but that doesn't translate to everyone on every single day. So we're kind of learning and adapting every single day with each conversation that we're having.
All the more reason to do your best to stay mindful and be open to the people who you're talking to, right?
So being in the moment and just feeding on what's going on, being attentive to different aspects.
Yeah.
And being aware of how it's making you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like as we were talking about, you know, like nonverbal communication too, the mention of it's not what you say as much as it is how you say it sometimes. So Sarko, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about this, because I know you're in a position where, you know, it's not like Hunter where he's, you know, dealing with his congregation, or Goku dealing with patients. You're dealing with folks who report to you, who you sometimes have to light a fire under. So what ways do you look out for, like, nonverbal cues from the folks who you're talking to? And what do you check in yourself when you're communicating with them, especially when urgency is involved?
As Goku said, it reminded me of a saying I saw yesterday at a meeting I was in. Know before whom you stand. Effective communication it's a practiced art. And I think to be good at that, you need to know your audience. In the military, we have a term called intrusive leadership. It's not that I'm trying to be nosy. I simply need to know as much about you as I can so that I can better lead, guide, or mentor you. I'll do it. I'll stand out at a focal point in my company area, and I'll just keep an eye out, shoot the breeze with people walking by, see how their day's going. It also lets me keep a pulse on the company. If somebody walks by and they're not them, I'll hit them up. Hey, you're not you today. What's up? And it could be
what are some things that stand out there that, like, ooh, this person's kind of off?
A change in gait, the way they walk, the pace. Could be a slump of the shoulder. Someone who's normally shoulders back, head up. All the yut kill of someone at a military academy. It could be that drooped head, or you just, again, we as human beings, we put out energy, we put out a vibe. Could just be something as simple as like that vibe. I don't know if anyone's read Malcolm Gladwell's book, blink, thin slicing, just being able to see a situation for what it is and know that there's something not quite right here, and simply asking. Counter to that, what I have to, and I'll be working on this till they throw dirt on me. It's when I'm overly excited or when I'm less than ideally pleased with someone's performance, keeping the emotions off my sleeve and trying to keep it as so that my body language doesn't betray whatever it is I'm about to do. Sometimes it's very much going to be other times it might just be, walk me through the thought process on what just took place. Explain to me how we arrived, where we've arrived. Maybe there's a factor I'm missing. And oftentimes, especially when you look like an axe murderer like I do, my body language can often put people on the offensive right away. Or the defensive, better yet, because it looks like I'm coming at them offensively. And that's not the case. It's just sadly how I am. So trying to keep that in check, especially like on the firing line, if someone does something unsafe, I have to correct that quickly and efficiently. Lest we all forget, though, they're still likely holding a firearm. So I have to do it in a manner in which I don't escalate the unsafe measure by overly freaking out, but I also don't underplay the seriousness of what just took place by not handling it properly. So I think definitely in the military and in life in general, the body language or that nonverbal communication, those nonverbal cues are essential to actual effective communication so that we don't betray or undermine what it is we're trying to communicate before we even open our mouths.
Yeah, that's really helpful. If you're getting ready, let's say you have a little bit of time before you have to have like a disciplinary kind of meeting with someone. Do you have any kind of a like prep that you do for yourself to make sure that you're not carrying whatever you did before into that meeting?
Deep breaths, hydrate. Sometimes we have a system where I can pull up the person's history. Give me that objective view again. We are not the sum. We are not the sum of the immediate action. We are the sum of all of our actions. So I might have somebody that's done something foolish or just outright wrong. Does that make them a bad person? Or kind of like the old analogy, if you had $83,000, you got 83,000 seconds in the day. If someone stole 10, are you really going to be upset? Depending on the severity of the actual action, is this person a bad person, or were they just not thinking? Was their head in their two-pack? So I try to, and if anybody who knows me was watching right now, they're probably going, sure. But whether or not they believe it, I try to center myself and go, okay, listen to what is said, analyze it for what it is. And then that's where that intrusive leadership comes in of, are they being forthright? Are they being honest with themselves? Are they being honest with me? Do they understand why it is that we're having this conversation? If any of those aren't checked in the box, then we won't have effective communication, especially if they don't understand why they're there, why I'm feeling the way I am about what they did or what they said. And then that will impede them from opening up and sharing with me their honest thoughts. They may honestly think they did nothing wrong. And if they honestly think that, cool, tell me so we can communicate. So keeping that body language in check so that I don't look like I'm looming over my desk ready to pounce or
not doing any of this kind of stuff.
Exactly. The job is to, for lack of a better phrase, make the mission happen. And to do that, I need everyone operating at their peak. And if they're not at their peak, let's find out why. We can always, the job will always be there. Work will always be there. Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's figure this out. And then in that, we'll likely, even if we come to the understanding that we disagree, well, now we've got a baseline to start with. We both agree on something. And that's usually best done when I'm not, and they're not already on the defensive. So, the nonverbal cues, or just centering yourself and taking you out of the emotion. It's not about us. It's about them. It's about everybody else. The person to the right or left of us. All the trite and cliched, Spartan-esque leadership things, but it's all rooted in truth of just making sure, hey, am I right to enter into this meeting? And sometimes we get it wrong. As Hunter said, the reflection. I need to work on the meditation, but the reflection piece, I'm always armchair quarterbacking. Yeah, I probably could have handled that differently, or I probably could have handled that better, or there should have been more knife hand. So I hope that answers the question.
That does. That does. And I'm excited because, there's always that part of me, I think, that knows that things will lean towards kind of mindful practices. But then when it happens without me having to like poke and prod at people, I get so jacked up. So it's so cool to see you talking about the notion of like, you have to know your audience, right? And then we go back to what Hunter said, which is you have to know yourself in order to know your audience. So all of this is still tying into us all needing that time to sit with ourselves, to pay attention to our own emotional responses, our own needs, everything that we're dealing with, so that we can then look at others with that same kind of empathetic reasoning of like, oh man, if I go through this much, I wonder what's going on in that head of yours, especially since you are displaying these nonverbals, like you've got your head slumped and you're walking a little different. It's cool to see how all of this ties in so well and still leads us back to what the first couple panels I've run have been about, which is taking care of ourselves, like figuring out who you are and what you want out of life so that you can then have some clarity to bounce that off of and be like, okay, this is what I need from you. This is what I want from you. Super, super helpful. And it leads us right into our next question too, which is what role does empathy have in communication? And I'm going to give Bossy an opportunity to kind of tackle this. And you can do it on a grander scale or at like the adolescent level if you'd like.
Right. When I think about empathy, I think back to when I was doing my master's, and something that they taught us a lot about and ways to think about empathy was called trauma-informed care. So that's like thinking about how you don't really know what a person has been through, right? And that facilitating you to come at them with empathy. So for me, personally, and through my program, like I try to think like, I don't know what this person has been through. I don't know specifically with kiddos, like I don't deal with discipline. That's like one of our rules as school counselors. We don't want to breach that barrier because we do, similar to therapists, have like confidentiality rules. And I don't want them to not be able to trust me, to be able to come to me and talk to me. But sometimes I do talk with them about things that occur that cause them to be disciplined, or will cause them. So, I'll come at them with empathy though. I'll be like, okay, let's talk this through. What happened? What made you feel this way? I currently work with middle schoolers. Sometimes they have the vocabulary, sometimes they don't have the vocabulary. And that's when we go through, okay, tell me how your body was feeling. Like, tell me, we go through a bunch of symptoms per se. Like they could be physical symptoms. Like they're like, oh, I just got like really hot and my body tensed. And I was like, so you were really angry, or, you were raging, as my middle schoolers like to use a very different vocabulary sometimes. And just coming at them with like, okay, I get that this is how you were feeling. How do we think the other person was feeling? And trying to instill with them that empathy of, okay, and trying to see not just, we're not the sun, the world doesn't revolve around us type of mindset. Yeah.
That's cool. I like that you take them right away into, let's look at this from the other person's perspective. That's a skill that I would have loved to have developed at a younger age because, talking about Goku going through that whole kind of spectrum there, I was definitely very aggressive for a very long time. And now I'm at that point where I'm like, okay, that's probably not necessary. We don't need to attack everyone who's mean to us. They might be going through something. Who knows?
Right. And anyone who knows me, thinking about how Goku talked about the differences in culture, I'm huge on intersectionality. So knowing like intersectionality basically means like people's different identities. So like for me, personally, I identify as non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a person of color. Like I have many intersectionalities, right? And sometimes the reason I bring this up is that affects how I communicate. I'm a person who also has anxiety. I don't like to look people in the eye, just to use the eye example. I'm constantly looking away. Even during these types of things, I don't really look into my camera, right? I look somewhere else. And teaching people to have empathy like that, that's everyone communicates, but we all communicate differently. And there are many different forms of communication. Even like if you think of love languages, right? Those are varying different ways of communication. So even teaching kiddos that, so some of my middle school is a rough time for them, and where they're finding out who they are and what kind of friend groups they want to be in. So sometimes them being like, well, I don't think they want to be my friend. Like they don't really talk to me a lot, or, you know, I gave them this thing, but they didn't seem happy with it. And it's like, okay, well, what are some ways that they are showing you their love or, you know, their time? Yeah, and just having empathy revolve around that. And empathy, I guess I should talk about this, is different than sympathy, right? Sympathy is the whole like, oh, I'm sorry that that's what happened to you. But empathy is like, wow, I've been there and I totally feel what you're feeling. So that's the difference. Empathy is more like the whole you can actually walk in their shoes. Sympathy is more the like, you haven't had that experience, but you can still feel sorry for them. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification and that distinction. That's really helpful. Hunter, is there anything that you can add on to that as far as like what role empathy has in your communication with others and how you attempt to like instruct others on how to be more empathetic?
Yeah. So Bossy hit the nail on the head. I think she did a really good job explaining that. One thing that I find myself getting caught up in, I'm pastoring in a community that I grew up in, and so it's extremely easy for me to think, well, I've known this person my entire life, or assume that I know their background because they've grown up in the same community that I have, and so it interact in such a way with them to where I feel like I know where they're coming from. And so when we talk about not understanding the situation that they're speaking from in a conversation, that's called I think it's called the principle of the construal, which is just how they understand a conversation or a situation because of who they are. And everybody is unique. And it's easy for us to kind of get caught up in, well, they live in the same area that I do, or I've known them my entire life, so I understand what they're experiencing. When really you have no idea what they have just come out of, maybe that day or that week. So it's important to leave room for that in a conversation. And so when expressing, like when I might let my emotions overcome me in a conversation, and expressing anger or something like that, they may have said something that I felt like provoked that anger that they didn't necessarily mean. Or I like understanding, going back to understanding yourself, my situation there may be other factors that play there as well. So being able to understand other people come from a unique situation and have unique perspectives on life is extremely important in talking to other people. And I don't know that I can say it any better than Bossy did.
Yeah. They definitely have a way with words at times. That's why we got bars going on Fridays together. And remember they, them pronouns for Bossy,
oh, yes.
please, my friend.
Sorry about that.
That's perfect though, because that, you know, you even mentioned being kind of reactive in situations at times. Like we all have those moments where you go into something thinking, I'm going to be the very nice person. And then the knife hand comes out, right? Like it's very easy for us to get caught up. And for me, one of my goals is always to try to identify those like triggering moments after, you know, in that reflection that you had mentioned earlier, like, oh man, I really thought I had a grip on my anger, but this is the thing that got me today. Okay, noted. How can I kind of plan in advance to make sure I don't do that again? So from your perspective, Allison, we'll head to you for a little bit here. Ray, I think you said you'd prefer to be called on here. What would you recommend? Because I'm sure that this has got to be challenging for you dealing with families at times, like groups of people who you're trying to help maintain some peace in. How can we avoid becoming or staying so highly reactive so that we can continue to have productive conversations?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think empathy is a huge part of that. One thought that I had that I wanted to just add on to what Bossy was saying is that empathy can sometimes just be stepping into people's situation versus observing it from the outside, right? So we kind of climb into whatever they're dealing with and try to understand it. And we can say, like, hey, I haven't experienced what you've experienced, right? To make it clear, you're not like trying to say my experience is yours, but like being able to kind of step in there with them and just walk alongside them. I think people don't always realize how powerful that is. Um, but you know, a lot of times my own reactivity it looks different than some people's, but mine is like anxiety related usually. Like a very anxious, like obviously anxious response. Some people's anxiety I think comes out as anger, and some people's anxiety comes out as distraction, and some people's anxiety comes out, you know, as just awkwardness or I don't know what. But I think where was I going with that? So for me, I have to kind of calm down my anxiety by you know, taking deep breaths and just also remembering that like I don't have to solve anything for anybody. Like I don't have to like make people agree with me. I don't have to convince them of anything. I don't have to change their life in 1 minute or one session or like it's powerful just to be able to like step into things with people and walk through things with people. Um, and I constantly have to remind myself of that because like I think sometimes our reactivity comes from this place of like, no, 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 I need you to see me. I need you to understand me. No, I need you to get this. And like, that's just not helpful because people will get things when they're ready to get things. So I think most importantly, probably just keeping in mind that like I have little notes that I'm looking at. So that reactivity usually stems from some form of anxiety, whether it's connected to trauma or, you know, your diagnoses of whatever, or anything. I really think anxiety is like the thing that ties everything together. Um, and then, you know, from that, like causes other behaviors or actions or things. And um, I think if we address other people's anxiety that might be coming out in weird ways or our own anxiety that's coming out in weird ways, then things tend to calm down and productive conversations can happen. There's like a quote that floats around out there called "Be the calm in their storm," like for kids or ourselves, or if we can keep our calm, then we can make it through the storm, you know, whatever. That image helps me when I'm in the middle of like a situation where like, oh my gosh, it's getting really crazy. To just be like, okay, I can stay calm. This isn't like mine to deal with. This like I can keep my own calm and, you know, like watch what's happening around me and try to bring some calm into the situation. Because if we go up, I'm always giving this analogy to parents. If we go up with our kids, then we're all up here and everything's crazy. But if we can stay down here while our kids are up here, then we can start to bring them down.
Yeah. That's really nice. And there's this book that I really love called Be Here Now by Ram Dass. And there's like this one of the parts of the book has all these dope illustrations and it's really fascinating. And he is telling a story about how way back when he and a group of his friends were all hanging out and they decided they wanted to go to the store. And out of nowhere, the toddler that was kind of a part of their group, one of the friends had a child, starts just losing its mind, having a really tough time. And then all of the people there, this group of adults, they all start becoming reactive. They're getting amped up. They're getting worked up. Oh, how are we going to work this? Maybe you stay here and we go. No, because then the kid's going to be upset. So then finally one of them has the idea, whoa, we all just need to get ourselves cool. So they sat in a circle around this toddler and they held hands and they basically just meditated. They just checked in, relaxed themselves. And then the kid stopped crying and they all went to the store and had a great time. I think that's so wonderful that you brought up a very similar notion.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do when a kid's tantruming is just to sit there and go, like take a big deep breath because it calms myself down. And then sometimes magically I will see the kid go like, and you don't even have to say anything. It's just like, because if you were to say, take a deep breath, then they're like, like I would never do that. Why would I do that?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think another thing to remember to calm reactivity down can just be to stay curious, right? So just staying curious and open to learning whatever is going on with that person's. Because if we approach things from a place of reaction versus an attempt to gain understanding, right? There's a big difference in what that conversation leads to. If you're
Yeah.
just reacting versus like trying to understand, then it goes in totally different directions.
And that
And then
even ties in with like people who aren't listening to understand the other person. They're just listening for that opening for themselves. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you said it. You said the word that gets, I can tell my vacation story now. Awesome.
Yeah. Right. And that can be like a product of anxiety too. So I think we also have to understand like if somebody's doing that to like, not get offended because it's probably not about us.
Yes.
Like, I mean, I think that's the other note I made to myself is just to like, that other people's reactions is rarely about us and much more often about them and their experiences. And that helps me to stay calm when like a parent is like snapping at me for something and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, right? Versus like, what? I didn't do it, like I could react to their reaction and like whatever, but it's easier to just be like, oh, why did you? Oh, interesting. Okay. And I have this one person I work with, I love her so much because she's just like stream of consciousness a lot of times. But she'll do stuff to me that I'm like, whoa, that was pretty offensive. And then like I just will stay calm and be like, oh, okay. And not even really do much of anything. And then like 5 minutes later, she'll be like, I'm so sorry, that wasn't right. I shouldn't have said that. Like she'll catch herself. And so it's just amazing how powerful sometimes just not getting into it with people.
Yeah. I like the idea of like kind of staying curious too, because one of the things that I do when I have to deal with like challenging people in person is I try to treat it almost like a human case study or experiment where I'm just like, okay, so if we apply this stimulus, what is this creature gonna do? Okay, hey, I don't appreciate when you say things like that to me. It hurts my feelings. And then just like, what's next? Like get curious. I wonder what their reaction's gonna be.
Yeah. Well, I also am able to like give people really hard feedback sometimes by first addressing the anxiety, right? And saying, hey, I know this about you. I know you want to be a great parent. I know that you have your kids' best interests at heart, whatnot. I go down the list because I get to know people and really try to understand where they're coming from. So if I can say all that first and calm down that part, then I can say some really hard information sometimes. Like, hey, when you do this thing with your kid, I think,
Yeah.
and I can get them to think about things versus putting them on the offensive.
That goes right back to what Sarko was saying earlier about like how you have to know your audience. Because if you hadn't already been actively listening to the people that you were working with, you wouldn't have that list of things to go down while you're talking to them. So Sarko, we kind of talked about this in regards to like family stuff and having to deal with children. What about when it comes to dealing with adults, like in a professional setting or in the military or whatever? What do you do to help yourself to not be so reactive? Is that something that you help coach people in like that you work with as like, here's how you stop being so reactive? Is that something that comes into play with what you do?
Absolutely. And again, I'll be working on it till they throw dirt on me. But the biggest thing is, especially with someone like me and my personality type, based off of who I am over my career, is it's not my job to fix everything. It's my job to guide, mentor, and train, but it doesn't rest solely on my shoulders to fix everyone else's problems. And when I fail to realize that or fail to remember that, I find myself far more reactionary in the conversation because, I mean, if I'm honest, I've been a knucklehead for most of my life. I've made a lot of mistakes. So on the road of success, I've already identified and flagged a hell of a lot of potholes. And I only want to help these people avoid those potholes. And sometimes I'm almost detrimental to that mission by avoid the pothole instead of going, well, if you look at it like this, it might help you avoid potholes that I myself have hit. And just remembering that it's not about me. It's about them. What's the ultimate goal here? Helping them realize whatever it is that is the catalyst for why we're talking. which then comes back to the empathy. You and I could both start off on the exact same journey and have the exact same situation befall us, but given everything in our experiences thus far, we're going to have entirely different reactions to it and journeys after that. So remembering all of that, taking that into account, I think at least helps me remember not to be so reactionary and to just sit there and listen, get all the information. I can't better help advise or understand if I don't have all the variables, and I can't do that if I'm not truly listening to listen and understand, comprehend, if I'm just listening to tell them how I would fix it. I mean,
Yeah.
1,000 ways to skin a cat. It's not always about what's best. The most profound aha moments are when the person realizes it for themselves. They come to that realization on their own. They've worked through the problem. So that would be my take on it, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. And I heard this quote a long time ago that I thought was really interesting too, that kind of talks more about how we tend to not be great at communication kind of by default. And it was most conversations are actually monologues delivered in the presence of witnesses. And I want to make sure that I'm not one of those people who every time I'm like in front of another person, I'm just monologuing. Like, I want to make sure that there's some connection there. I want to try to prevent myself from becoming highly reactive and to avoid, pushing them into that kind of reactive mode. Is there anything that you do, like that you notice, Sarko, if someone is starting to get heated while you're talking, if you notice the kind of reactivity arising within them? Is there anything that you do at times like that to try and diffuse things?
I'll loop it back on why we're having the conversation in the first place, especially like in my line of work. It's very easy to let people wander off and learn the hard way. Reminding them that chances are if someone's applying foot to two-pack, whether physically or verbally, it's likely because they care about you. They want to see you improve. They want you to be a better you. And it's usually someone who, even if you disagree with, probably has a little bit more experience, a little more time in the saddle than you do. So just remembering that, I think, helps. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Trying to keep it from getting too far back. Like, I think that's beneficial to just, rather than like, hey, whoa, calm down. You can just refocus. Here's the thing. Here's where we're going from here. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. Let's go back to kids for a little bit, because I know we in the community, we have a lot of parents, we have a lot of people with younger siblings. There's people who are finding themselves cooped up with a whole pack of mini humans that are just trying to run wild during this time. And this is a hard time. Like, everything that's going on with COVID and everything else, like, there's some hard conversations that are having to be had with very young people right now. And I think one of the things that is overlooked often is the idea that children feel just as deeply as we do. But like Bossy was even saying earlier, sometimes they don't quite have the language. So, what are some other ways that we can work to bridge that gap in terms of understanding and communicating with these little mini people in our lives? And we'll go to you first on this, Ray.
Okay. Well, I guess I think what I usually start with parents is that behavior is communication.
Mm.
And when we can shift that perspective of like behavior is annoying and terrible and awful and frustrating and needs to be squashed to wait a minute, behavior is telling me something. It's telling me something that the kid isn't getting or is misunderstanding or is whatever. That's some kind of communication, and I have to help this kid figure out how to communicate it better or safer or kinder or whatever. That just immediately changes the conversations that we have with kids. Um, and I think kids can be some of our best teachers, and they can also pull out some of our most reactive behaviors. I know everything that I do, and I still will react to my own kid like in really unreasonable ways. Like, I know exactly what he's doing and why he's doing it, but instead I just, I'm like, stop it, we gotta go. Or, what are you doing? And so, I think I think we just have to be kind to ourselves and understand that, like, nobody's perfect, and like we're all trying to figure it out. And kids especially are just, like they're always learning and growing. And if we see a behavior happening over and over again, like, and we find ourselves struggling with it, we got to look at where it's coming from and try to I don't know, figure out what's going on. And I mean, I think the biggest thing, is that if we can pay attention, um, we can figure out how to teach them what to do instead, right? I think that when we have our focus as, okay, a behavior is happening, what can they do instead? How can we like replace it with something positive? That helps a lot with our little ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. What do you do when you notice that you've become highly reactive? Like, let's say you lash out and you yell at your kid or something.
Yeah.
What is your follow-up there?
Oh, well, if it's a good day, then I'm taking a deep breath, right? I'll stop and take a deep breath and step back and think, okay, how have I been acting today? What else is going on in our day? Like, have we been home for 2 days straight and not gone anywhere? Is he just getting bored? Have I been feeding him all the sugar? Have I been letting him watch all the TV? Just like kind of going through the list and like what might be causing him to feel dysregulated. And then what might be causing me to feel dysregulated, and how can we like, and I don't know, dysregulated is just referring to like my body feels off,
Mhm.
my emotions are going crazy, and kids too. Um, just checking in with like, okay, what's off? Why might that be? And let's try to figure this out together. And then I'll start sometimes like spouting things off to him, like, are you just this? I think maybe you're this. And sometimes I have to just decide, hey, it's time for lunch. It's like it's not a question. It's just I know because I do.
Do you do that for yourself too? Like if you kind of lashed out, if you were angry, do you walk him through like, okay, so I didn't have a snack today. Mommy missed her Snickers bar. Like I'm
Yeah.
clearly having some issues here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have that conversation with even someone as young as your kid?
Yeah, I do. I say to him, mommy has been in a really grumpy mood today, and I'm really sorry, buddy. Like the way I've been treating you is not very kind. It's not very nice. I wish I wasn't doing that. And I'll try to explain to him, like, I'm just feeling kind of funny, and, or I don't know, or
Mm,
whatever is going on. Sometimes I don't even know, what's off.
yeah.
We don't always know what's off. But yeah, I have those conversations for sure. And his
What a
reactions are
valuable thing.
really funny. 'Cause, they understand things in their own kid way, and like how he repeats stuff back to me always cracks me up. Like, oh, okay, you understood that. Cool. That's fun. Um, there was one little thing, like one thing that I really wanted to just touch on though is that like our distress tolerance is often really low when kids start yelling or crying or challenging us in some way. Um, but we forget how normal and necessary that their sort of behaviors of doing that are. Like they're an important part of them growing and learning. And I think sometimes like I find this in myself, like even my own baby was crying, I'm like, oh no, something's wrong, right? We like freak out instead of just like, no, it's okay for kids to cry. It's okay
Mhm.
for kids to get mad. It's okay for kids to tantrum. Like we want them to do things that are safe, right? We don't want them to break stuff or kick us, uh, but just
Ideally,
to,
yes.
like, yeah, ideally, but just to like normalize, like I think a lot of times where we get reactive with kids is because we're uncomfortable with them being uncomfortable. And so it
Mm.
actually comes from a really good place of like caring about the kids, wanting them to be happy and calm and peaceful and great and wonderful. But we have to work on ourselves being able to tolerate when people aren't okay. And kids
Like you have
especially.
both been talking about with like you can't fix their stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, or I mean, we can help and guide with kids, of course, we can help and guide them. Um, but when we start like our culture can get really like shame based and like, no, stop it. Don't do that.
Mm.
Quit it. Like very, you know, kind of coming from that place versus like, because the behavior is making us uncomfortable, right? So I don't know if I'm making sense, but just like,
Yes.
like their behavior makes us uncomfortable. And so before we can really like do the teaching and all that work, we have to just know that like behavior is going to happen, and it doesn't mean something's terribly wrong. It doesn't mean your kid has ADHD or, you know, all these things like, and even like ADHD, what's the big deal? I mean, your brain works differently. So what? Like, I
Goku,
don't
you
know.
had something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, as someone that has a few mini humans at home and that I deal with a lot of clients that do have, we need to recognize that these actions that kids have are normal, and the reactions parents have aren't generally reactions to the child, but to the situation and the perception that other people may have.
Yeah.
So you're at a store, kids having a tantrum, the automatic reactions for a lot of people is, oh my God, my kid's having a tantrum. What are other people going to say? I need to quiet the child down so to not bother other people. It's due to kind of societal norms and kind of the expectations we have of others. But generally, people are rather accepting of your child's having a tantrum. It's okay.
Yeah.
You're
We have
not a
all
perfect
been around
parent.
that.
You're not a perfect parent, and no one is. Recognizing that they're having a moment, and we just need to deal with the moment.
Yeah. We should almost expect kids to act out.
Yes.
Like it
And
just
I
should be
mean,
expected, not
really,
yeah.
we can go that route with adults too. Like this
Mhm.
is something that we talk about in my community a lot. Like if you are getting tripped up regularly in your daily life by the jerks of the world, really at this point it's on you for thinking that they didn't exist. Like you got to a point where you had deluded yourself into thinking that everyone was going to act and think and talk the way that you do. And oh crap, your expectations have not been met, and you've met another unconscious person who's just highly reactive, and now you're all twisted up over it. Just accept that you're going to run into those people. Accept that your kid's going to have a
Right.
meltdown over you not wanting them to just have Mountain Dew and Doritos, and carry on. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Which is funny because that's even one of the sentences that was on that thread that everyone was like, they don't like this. But I think it's always context, right? Bossy, I'm interested in hearing more from you on the children aspect of this. Like, if you could give people some additional tools, like maybe just one or two, like really important things to keep in mind when dealing with kids, or to start implementing if they haven't already when it comes to dealing with kids?
That's a tough one.
It's tough. I know this is all of your knowledge and training down to like two things.
Ooh, yeah, that's real difficult. I think something that I have learned, because before working at a middle school and before my master's, like I worked with littles, as we like to call them, like elementary age kiddos. I worked with children with autism for quite a long time. I was a behavior interventionist. But something that kind of helps is that they probably will communicate with you as much as you communicate with them. So something that I learned a lot to do was I would preface things a lot. So I like if we were having a transition, I'd be like, all right, in about 5 minutes, we're going to do this. Like, okay, like, tomorrow we're probably going to do this. Or, okay, this person is angering you. They're probably going to anger you again. What can we do or say next time? So like kind of prefacing things and whether it's between you and the kiddo or the kiddo and someone else, just helping them learn that I'm going to communicate with you. So hopefully you communicate with me.
That's helpful.
Yeah, I guess that would be something. And then trying to, like I said earlier, if they don't have that language, trying to dig a little deeper and be like, okay, so tell me how your body felt.
Mm.
Like trying to, and then kind of like Ray was saying, and then just throw something out there, be like, oh, so you were mad? And then kids have no problem telling you, no, that's not how I felt. So that's something that we learn a lot. Like, don't be afraid to name it in my school counseling program. So sometimes I'll be like, so you were anxious? And they'll be like, no, not really. And I was like, okay, so then what do you think you were? And then, you know, trying to throw it out there, even if you're afraid that that's not the right thing, and they'll happily correct you.
Yeah, that's nice. And I like, I've seen like the example of like the feelings chart or the feelings wheel, which has been really helpful for me as I dealt with like all of my own kind of internal issues that I was dealing with. Starting to recognize how many times I would say the words I feel followed by an assessment, not an actual feeling statement.
Yeah.
I feel like you hate me. Like, wait a minute, that's not a feeling. What do you
Yeah.
feel because you think they hate you? Let's get the feeling word out of this.
Yeah, we have
That's-
a lot of those. And
Yeah.
there's like even a bigger one that I've been using in my own adult life where it's like, you know, sad, and then it has other sections that branch off of sad, and then
Yeah.
even more sections. And it's like, if you just look at up emote wheel, I'm sure, or emotional wheel.
Yeah,
Feelings wheel.
emote, we're on Twitch.
I was like, wait a
You're
minute,
just gonna
wait.
get, are you feeling poggers or not like this?
Right. No, but look up like a feelings wheel, and I'm sure that there was some words that I was like, I've never even heard of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this
And
is
even-
perfect given that we're talking about communication, because this goes right back to what we talked about at the beginning with Hunter, is like, you've got to identify what's going on in yourself so that you can start recognizing it in others, and so you can start seeing it in kids or help them to feel it. That's really helpful. You had something else you wanted to add, and then I think Ray had a point she wanted to bring in as well.
I did, but I kind of forgot. So Ray can, if I remember, I will bring it back up.
It was just two things. I was thinking about what Bossy was saying about like the preparing kids, like running dialogue kind of thing. And I was just going to say one of the things I frequently suggest to parents, but it's really hard to do. It takes a lot of practice because it feels weird, is to just be like basically, you know, I've heard other people compare it to like a sportscaster of like what's happening. Like, and now he's taking the toy and he's going to hand it to Johnny. Like, and just like running dialogue of what's happening, or even about yourself. Like, oh, now I'm going to walk into the kitchen and I'm getting you your food because you're hungry and you're waiting patiently on the couch. Like, it feels super bizarre, but it's amazing how well that works for kids, because then they're not like, it prevents things from kids like nagging at you or like, you know, doing things where they're asking you over and over and over again. Because if they don't see you doing it, it's not happening. So,
Yeah.
you know, like, and also it helps with like siblings. I've done a lot of sibling work where kids fight all the time. And if I just sit there and like comment on what the other's doing and help the other read the other brother or sister, like it just changes the dynamic so much, you know.
Yeah.
The other little thing well, it's not super little, but I just wanted to throw out there to keep in mind that people, I think, need to be mindful of like intergenerational trauma, or even trauma, whatever you want to call it, intergenerational patterns, I guess you could say, right? So like, I think sometimes in this culture, we like to place blame and find where the blame comes from. I think it's a lot better if we just look at like, it's a whole big picture and everything plays a part in what's happening, and it's not any one person's fault, and it's not any one thing going on. It's like, you know, we all bring with us, I think I've heard some theories that say you bring with you like 7 generations, right? Because, you know, one affects the other, affects the other, affects the other. It all gets kind of passed down. And if you're trying to break a cycle of, you know, whatever, abuse, addiction, or even lighter, you know, stuff that's like passive aggression, right?
Yeah.
A
Guilt
family
and
pattern of-
shame are big
Yep.
in my
Oh,
family.
yeah.
That's the family pattern that's been passed on.
Right. Just be patient with yourself and with your kids, right? Because they're a product of that too. They're, you know, it's you're gonna pass stuff on to your kids whether you want to or not. And we're just gonna all have to keep working at it and dealing with it, and it's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's helpful. That's great. I think especially the idea of narrating what's going on, like it sounds very comical. I feel like for the average parent, if they're trying to like deal with stuff with like their kids kind of at each other's throats, I could see that being very entertaining.
Yeah.
Provided it doesn't go the passive aggressive route.
Well, right. Yeah. It can go funny directions.
Little
sure.
Johnny's being a rude boy today.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that we talked about in our little group chat before we got into this was like doing some examples of like say this, not that. So I'm gonna throw a couple of them out real quick, and I'll give just whoever raise a little hand or a finger because we don't have too much time. But like, let's go with an example of you're making me angry. How would any of you, Goku, how would you rephrase that or advocate for someone else to reframe that?
One thing I teach a lot with a lot of my clients are I statements. So it's a 3-part sentence. I feel when you, because. I feel angry when you do something. And then you explain the why.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's important for the other person to understand why that behavior caused that emotional response. Because emotional responses are situations that are individualistic. What makes me angry may not make someone else angry.
Mm-hmm.
But my emotions are valid, and I have a right to explain them to other people.
Yeah. That exact sentence, I was so hoping one of you would mention that today. That exact like kind of format helped me a ton in my own life in learning how to make less like aggressive statements all the time. When you come home late, I feel sad because I feel like you weren't thinking about me. And as a result, like, you know, I'm not important to you or whatever. Like it makes it so much easier to identify the actual feeling again, because there's that format. So I make sure I'm not just making an assessment. I feel that you're a big jerk, you know, whatever. Like you're actually breaking it down. It's really easy to follow. So another one then, how about this? This happens a lot, right? People bring up the past in a lot of arguments. How would any of you respond, reframe, or advocate for someone else to change their language if they were to make a statement to a partner, a friend, or something and say, you always do this? Where would you take that? Any thoughts?
Well, I probably wouldn't say this to somebody, but I think when we do that, we're reverting back to our 5, 6-year-old selves, where everything's black and white and it's all or nothing, right? And we kind of go into little kid mode where like, nothing's ever gonna go right, or it's never gonna happen. But I think, you know, rather than you always do this, just being like, I've noticed a pattern. Or, I mean, you don't have to say it that way. That sounds very therapist-y. Therapist-ish. But, you know, like, I feel like there's something that happens a lot. You know, I've noticed this happens a lot, and I'm wondering, what can we do about it? Because
that seems a lot more constructive, leaves a little bit of room for a conversation versus you always do this.
Yeah.
You always eat my last cookie.
Yeah.
That's not from a real example or anything. Moving on to the next one then. Apologizing is a really big one. So I'm super interested in hearing from any of you on how you would tell people how to apologize or how to correct a sentence that starts with, I'm sorry, but. Any thoughts? Okay, Goku?
There shouldn't be any buts in an apology. And if you're explaining, well, in the way you're mentioning it, if you say, I'm sorry, but, then you're kind of devaluing the apology. So you need to express the feeling where you felt that happened, but also apologize for the emotion, the behavior that you had.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we talk about this a lot in my community as well. Like your intentions versus your impact are two very different things. So it's easy to think, well, I don't need to apologize because I didn't mean it that way. Like, what do you mean? This is what I meant. This is on you because you didn't understand what I meant. it's very important that we all understand that intent versus impact is something to be cognizant of. What you may have intended might not have worked out. So if you hurt someone's feelings, whether it was unintentionally or not, apologize and leave the buts out of it. I know buts are great, but you can leave them out of this one thing, just this one thing.
And within communication, the message often never comes across the way you want it to. Because within communication, you have the communicator, and then you have the listener. They both have their emotions, experiences, a whole bunch of things. And then there's noise in the middle. There's room for losing the message. Who remembers playing the telephone game when they were kids? How often does the message really come across all the way at the end? Because there's always small little variations. And if we assume what the other person said is what we heard, then we kind of go on in error.
Yeah. And assumptions are definitely a big way to get yourself off track when it comes to dealing with people. There's one more that I want to add in terms of a say this, not that. Let's say there's a conversation happening and someone is expressing something to you, or you're expressing your feelings of how something happened with someone, and they immediately say that's not what happened. Where do you go from there? I'm going to let Hunter take this one.
So I would rephrase that by starting a conversation of, I think we perceived this situation differently. Tell me how you perceived it. Starting with allowing them to say what they think that happened, and often it's not ever a disagreement about the facts around the situation, but rather how those facts were perceived by each party. So it's extremely important not to say that's not what happened. It's we perceive this a little differently.
Yeah, that's good. Nice and clear, right to the point. You love to see it. Okay, we're going to move on to our final takeaway. And because we're somewhat limited for time, my lovely friends in the community, as much as I would love to do Q&A, I don't think we're going to have the ability to do that today. But all of these lovely people here can be found on social media. And I would love it if we have a mod that can drop their links one more time for everyone, so you can all continue to converse after this. But where I'd like for us to kind of leave off here is all of you are on this panel because you are well-versed in communication, because you do it regularly and you actively challenge yourselves to continue to learn and grow in your communication skills. Because this is not something where you get to a point where it's like, I've done it. I have beaten communication. I am the black belt in communication. Therefore, I don't have to learn anymore. This is an ongoing thing, just like the work of anti-racism. It's something that you do ongoing forever. So knowing that we're hopefully getting people in this community now to understand that communication is something that needs to be prioritized, if you could get people here in the audience who are watching this or listening later to do further research or reading on one topic related to communication, or if you want to recommend a book or whatever, what would that one thing be that you would tell them, go find more out about this? Or is there a podcast or a series or a video that you would recommend? And we'll start with you, Sarko.
I would be that book. I keep it in my office. I can't reference it enough. Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, The Art of Thin Slicing. Being able to read and process a situation and go with that gut feeling of something is not right, I feel has helped me become a better leader in that intrusive leadership aspect of, I know my people. I strive to know them better. I strive to know who my audience is. I strive to know myself better, so that, again, when something stands out as not right, whether it be a shift in body language, a shift in tone, intonation, inflection, I can instantly realize, all right, am I getting through? Am I losing the conversation? Am I being a little too me? And then get things back on track and keep everything fruitful for both parties, or for me and the audience. That would be my recommendation. Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink.
I wrote that down. You mentioned it twice and I was like, good, I'm so glad you brought that up again. I want to not forget this. Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Hunter, what about you? What would you recommend?
So I read a book a few months ago called Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. And it's by Doug Stone. It did a really great job of just talking about the steps that we can take when we know that we're going to be faced with a difficult conversation, whether that's in the workplace or with a friend or even with a spouse. The preparation that needs to take place beforehand, and then the steps that we can take place that need to take place within that to have a more successful outcome with less stress involved.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Goku, what about you? If you could point people in one direction or give them a resource that you think they should check out, where would you send them?
Rather than recommending a book, I'm going to recommend a specific type of communication, which is reflective listening.
Ooh.
So oftentimes, and someone had mentioned it in chat, people will generally listen to respond rather than listen to understand. And reflective listening is based on listening to understand rather than preparing my own argument or counterpoint. Is let me kind of summarize what you told me, making sure I really heard what you said before going on to my next point. It helps the other person feel understood, that you're engaged, that you are really invested in the topic. And it's something all therapists, or hope all therapists, do with their clients. It's something I do all the time. So what I heard you say was X, Y, Z. Then you give the other person the chance to, yes, it's you heard correctly, or no, what I meant was this.
I could see that being a really good thing to do more research on, because I think some people get that kind of twisted up too. Like when I was still living in Chicago, I remember having to call to deal with Comcast at one point, which like, oh my God, talk about that all day. But they had started implementing this new like protocol that they would do on the phones where they would do like parroting. And it drove me insane because I would be like, hey, so I'm having trouble with my internet right now. And like, that's what I do for a living. I work online. So this is really important. Like, I really need to talk to someone about this. This needs to be addressed really quickly. And they would be like, oh, hey, yes, thank you. I totally understand that you work online. And if I worked online, I would also feel sad that I could not work online. So I understand that you are feeling sad because you cannot work online right now. So let me just try to help you with that. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to do this after everything I say, aren't we? And I would have to start interrupting them after a while. Like, listen, I know you're about to repeat everything I just said in a different way. You don't need to do it. Can you just get me to the next level tech, or I'm gonna lose my mind? So reflective listening is to not become a parroting robot, friends. Take a look at that.
Yeah, the way we reflect there is, I'm sorry to hear that you're having a hard time. What I understood you saying is you work online and this is causing you issues. Let's see where we can go from there.
Way better. Way better. I wouldn't have been like crushing my phone in my hand if they had responded in such a manner. All right. Moving on then. Bossy, what about you? If you could point people in the direction of something valuable, whether it's a book or a topic or whatever, where would you send them?
There's this book that I personally love that I did, that we used through my program, and it might be expensive, but I'm sure that you can find like YouTube videos talking about it because it's very well known. And it's called Courageous Conversations. Normally it has to do with race, but these sentence stems that they give, I think, are great for communication in general. Yes, Courageous Conversations. That's the one.
Cool. Well, I don't have to write that one down because I got it, but I'm excited to get into it because I haven't had a chance yet.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that. All right. Ray, what about you? If you could point people in one direction or towards a certain resource, where would you send them?
I'm just gonna default to what I like. One of the first models that I ever used was collaborative problem solving. And there's this book over here called The Explosive Child. And I think the concepts that they talk about apply to adults just as well as kids. It's kind of this like 3-step format of like first step is we put our concerns on the table. Everybody gets a chance to be heard. And then the second step is, well, I think I'm probably getting them wrong, but then you move on to problem solving, right? So basically the point is we all get to be heard before we move on to problem solving so that we understand what the concern is, right? Like I'm tantruming because I'm worried we're not going to have time to do this. And, parents get to say, oh, well, I'm worried that because you're tantruming, we're not going to get to have time to do this. Like, so, I don't know, just you get to kind of have those conversations in a different way. And it's nice. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Those are some good suggestions, I think. I feel like everyone in the community should have some good places to go and do a little bit of research. If I were to add something to that, friends, I think I would say look into nonviolent communication, also known as compassionate communication, which is the kind of foundational basis that we as this group used as we kind of crafted our messages for today and what we wanted to talk about and how we wanted to discuss it. There's a book I read that I also really liked, and it was called If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? And it's by Alan Alda. And if you read or listen to the audiobook, he reads it himself, and I just love his voice. So it's like you're getting this wonderful communication knowledge from someone who sounds like he's just the most loving grandpa ever. So I would probably be directing people there, like do some research on nonviolent communication, check out some of these books, make this a part of your practice. And as we talked about with like empathy and compassion, they're a huge part of this. If you don't work to start widening your circle of compassion and looking at everyone you meet, like same team, your own brain will work against you in your ability to empathize with others. And, we've got a quick minute here. Maybe Goku can even run through really quick if you've got a moment to talk about like in-group versus out-group distinctions and how that can kind of close us off.
Sure. Well, the concept is we tend to latch on to a group that we identify with and kind of solidifies our social identity. And the more we solidify with that in group, the more we tend to push away the out group. So it's that us versus them mentality. Man, that us versus them mentality can increase emotional distress, frustration, that combativeness, and this can be in anything. You can like a particular shoe brand, and then someone says something bad about that particular brand of shoe, and you're up in arms because you need to defend what you've emotionally invested in.
Yes, I appreciate that. I appreciate that quick run through of that. If I can add one more book, then there's a book from David Eagleman, who's a really interesting neuroscientist, called Incognito. And if I remember correctly, that was where I had first learned about the kind of in-group versus out-group distinction. And he references some like tests that they ran. And it really can be so arbitrary, but like doing like shirts versus skins and playing a game of basketball. If they were to run scans on your brain, the people who are not on your team, if they fall or they get injured or something, your mirror neurons don't fire in the same manner. Like if you're watching your own home team and someone falls, there's that, oh, like you kind of clench up without even thinking about it. But if they're on the other team, your body doesn't react in the same way. So it is so important, my friends, in all dealings, everything that you're going through, that you do start to look at people, at everyone, even the ones that frustrate you, as same team. We're all in this together. We're all on this same planet together right now. So we might as well learn how to communicate kindly with each other. And it starts with you understanding yourself better so that you can understand others better. And it continues with you doing the work every day. You've heard it from everyone here. Communication is a practice. It's time to start practicing. Be a hand raiser like Sarko. And when you see opportunities to communicate and converse, take those opportunities. Know you'll make some mistakes, but it's okay. We're all going to get through this together. We're all going to work on building our communication together, right? Awesome. Everyone, thank you so much for being a part of this today. If I could get a mod to post their social handles again, or the link to where all of them are tagged, that would be great. But everyone, for real, thank you for being a part of this. This was great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Totally.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Totally. Everyone,
Appreciate
go
it.
support them. Talk to them elsewhere. I'm sure you'll be seeing more of them. And we're going to close this off for today.